I did not want to be in no gang. I just wanted to live my life. When I met him, things changed. If I join this gang, then I'll be protected because no one was around when I was little to protect me. I had absolutely no control over what I did. The guy that said that he loved me would set me up to have sex with other men. He was pimping me out. This is not love. This is bondage. This is prison. Gangs are not cool. People get killed innocently. When I did run, he would find me.
Good morning and welcome. Oh, I'll have to speak softly here. You can probably turn me down a little bit. Welcome those of you here in the sanctuary, and we have a good number of folks joining us online this morning to talk about a vital topic that most would rather was hidden. And I need to mute my microphone. It's getting an echo from my computer. I just want to welcome you and thank you for being here. And let's open with a brief word of prayer. Lord, we just ask your spirit to rest upon us, be with those that are here, those that wherever they might be this morning, we would ask that you would draw us closer to you, and that at the end of the day, we would be inspired to follow you. In Jesus' name, amen. I'm just want to start by there we go. I want to start today by I'm going to ask you to do some things as we get started today, and that is I'm going to ask you, one, if at any time during the day you're stressed and feel a need to step out, feel free to do that. You're going to hear me say that a couple of times today. But because we're talking about a very difficult topic. And I'm going to ask you to check your assumptions and your judgments at the door when you came in. Let me tell you what I mean by that. We all make assumptions about people, about things, and we make judgments, what I call by default. You know, you walked in here this morning, some of you knew me, some of you didn't. Some of you walked in expecting a guy that was 30 years old, and I'm not. And so I want you to think about what have you already decided? I've started to speak, and the way I speak, you're making judgments and assumptions about who Jeff Bobbin is. And so I'm going to ask you to set those aside, because we're going to talk about a lot of things today that people make assumptions and judgments. Let me just start by talking about a couple of things. I want to first of all, once again, welcome you and just tell you that the agenda today, I'm gonna put some challenges out for you. I'm going to talk about how we prevent human trafficking. I'm going to one of the most, we'll make sure we feed you during the day. We're going to talk about how we do intervention, what happens after there's an intervention and people are working on being restored to a new normal. We'll have time for questions. And at the end of the day, we'll wrap up and do evaluations. Let me introduce myself. My name is Jeff Bobbin. I am a pastor. I'm a storyteller. I probably should put that first. If you know me very well, I can't go a minute, it seems, without telling a story. And you're going to hear lots and lots of stories from me today. So I tell everybody I'm a storyteller, and I have spent my whole career, whether it was in business, where I spent 20 years. I would have an accounting biz ed degree from Geneva College, and then got an MBA from Robert Morris. Spent 20 years in management before I became a pastor. And when I was doing that, I decided that part of my calling was to develop leaders at all different levels. And I was working in the church, and then after 20 years fighting the call to ministry, 26 years ago, I became a pastor. And so since then, I've been doing that. And but who I am, I'm still a storyteller. I was a storyteller in the beginning, and we're going to talk about why story is important. And I tell everybody this: if storytelling was the way to help people along for Jesus, it works for me. And so that's what I plan to do today. We have two other folks you're going to hear from this afternoon that have graciously come. One that planned to be here for weeks. The other that just got kind of thrown into the fire yesterday. Many of you probably saw in our opening publicity that Rose Hilliard from Crawford County Women's Center was supposed to be here. She does vital work in Crawford County. She came down with COVID 2 days ago and is very sick today. And so we're thankful she's not here to share that with us, but we wish her well and keep her in our prayers as well. But she was going to bring a young lady along with her who will tell you some of her story later. Her name is Morgan Tigwell, and she's sitting over here. Do you want to come to the mic and introduce yourself a little bit now, or just tell us who you are?
Hi, my name is Morgan Tingwall. I work at Women's Services in Crawford County, PA, and I'm also a survivor of human trafficking.
Here, take this to Cinnamon. We'll make it easier. No, Cinnamon will come up here. We also have with us today somebody that I just met a couple of months ago, but her name is Cinnamon Evans. She's the executive director for Venango County CASA, and I'll let her tell us what CASA is.
CASA stands for Court Appointed Special Advocates. The program is not offered here in Clarion County, however, it is in Crawford and Venango. It is a program that we advocate for children who have been abused or neglected, and we do that with community volunteers. I've been with CASA for 17 years. I actually started the program. Before that, I was a paramedic. So kind of two different worlds. I'm glad to be here and hope to educate all of you on things that we're seeing out in the field. Thank you. Thanks,
Cinnamon. Looking forward to hearing from you. Let me tell you a little bit about my presentation style. I do a lot of presenting. And I tell everybody that I am a storyteller, and you're going to hear that. Part of my story is the way I develop my presentation style. And I've created a lot of PowerPoints so that you don't have to read my writing, because the way I prepare presentations is every morning I get up and I read normally between 4 and 8 in the morning. Some people say to me, how do you get so much reading done? And I say, when you read 3 to 4 hours a day, you can manage to read a lot of books. And so I get up early in the morning, and then I take notes. And that's kind of what my notes look like. They're scribbles and scratches. I even brought some notebooks with me. I use an old-fashioned college-bound notebook, and I write and I graph and I chart, and then I can go back. And so for the last 15 months, that's what I've been doing with human trafficking, along with many other things. And I did not want you to have to try to read that kind of writing, so I've got most stuff that I'm going to do today in PowerPoint. I won't promise you that won't write anything. I may do that. One of the reasons that I do that, though, is that I'm always preparing for what I call the back of the placemat. Darren, do I have to point this at something? There it is. Most of what I do, most of the presentations I do, whether I'm talking about a Bible study or leading somebody as on one-on-one development, is in either one-on-one or small groups. And oftentimes you can tell I like to eat. And so oftentimes what I do is I'll get together with somebody in a restaurant. And if you've ever been through one of these with me, I'll take the placemat and I flick it over and I write things out. Or I've done it on napkins, I've done it on all kinds of things. But if I'm talking to you and I'm working something through with you, I'm going to do that. I'm going to write that out. So that's what I do in the morning. If I was presenting this to somebody else, what are the key components? And by writing things down, it also helps me to remember. My life, and this is shaped by the Bible. I don't make any apologies for that. I spend some time in this book as well every day. Probably the only book that I read over and over and over again. Any other book, I'll go back and read sections, and I'm also going to tell you that I work really hard to read the whole thing, not just the parts. It is not a Jeffersonian Bible. You know, Jefferson took the Bible and cut all the things he didn't like out. All right, well, I don't believe that's what God inspired us to do. And so I have not done that. It shapes my life. And it also it's going to shape this presentation as it does every presentation I do. Now here, as a speaker, I always try to warn people what they should expect. And here's your number one expectation. Expect to feel overwhelmed today. I really believe that at some point today, most people, especially people talking about human trafficking for the first time, at some point feel overwhelmed. And we're going to be here for 5 hours today talking about human trafficking. I also want you to know you probably are going to feel frustrated at times. You might be frustrated with me. You might be frustrated with the situation. You might be frustrated with our government. You might be frustrated with all kinds of other things. So I tell you that up front for one reason. I want you to know that if that happens, it's okay. If you're frustrated, you're feeling a little overwhelmed, and again, if you need a break, feel free to do that. Feel free to step out. We do have a couple of people here that are willing to chat with you. Morgan in particular, who's got experience in dealing with folks that have been trafficked. But I also want you to leave here feeling hope. My goal for at the end of the day, when we get done this afternoon, is that you will leave here feeling hopeful that there can be a difference. It's not a problem. It's a $150 billion illegal industry in the United States. $150 billion problem. So we're not gonna fix it today. But I do want you to have hope that you can walk out of here and make a difference. And so I'm also hoping you'll leave here inspired this afternoon to have figured out maybe where you might work. So I want you to do, I'm going to tell you, just give you up front, I'm going to talk in generalizations a lot. I'm going to talk about men. I'm going to talk about women. I'm going to talk about, there's going to be all kinds of things. And remember, I asked you to set your judgments and assumptions aside. Don't assume you know what I'm thinking. My goal is for you to be thinking differently. So I have a little exercise I want you to do. If you're watching from home, I simply want you to draw 9 dots, like the ones that are on your screen. That 9 dots is, and I gave you, those of you in the sanctuary here, I gave you a piece of paper with those 9 dots on them. I want you to put your pen on the paper, pen or pencil on the paper, and I want you to connect all 9 dots with 4 lines without raising your pen. 4 lines without raising your pen to connect all 9 dots. So if you're at home, I hope you'll do that as well. And you know, it's the dots don't matter. They should be a square, kind of equal distant. They don't have to be. And when you figure it out, put your hand up. All right, got 1, 2. We got somebody helping somebody else. What was the secret to doing it? Those of you that have already figured it out, what was the secret? Nah, you gotta go outside the box. The only way to solve this puzzle is to go outside the box. And it's a puzzle that I've been using for years. I took an engineering course in plant layout when I was in college, and it's the first time I ever saw this exercise, and I kept trying to figure all kinds of ways, and finally somebody said, "Bobbin, go outside the box." Well, that's what I'm going to ask you to do today. I'm going to ask you to think outside the box. Now, one of the things about thinking outside the box is we're going out. Why do we have struggled to go outside the box in that exercise? We struggle with it because if we go outside the box, it doesn't feel right. It feels like we're breaking a rule that we had in our mind that I never gave you. And so it's really easy to do. You saw how quickly I did it. And, you know, I love to go places where somebody else uses that exercise because I can solve the puzzle now in about 30 seconds, you know. But sometimes I still have to think about it, even though I know we have to go outside the box. Now, the next thing I'm gonna ask you to do is I'm gonna ask you to practice what I call PPP. Now, I know a year ago that stood for Paycheck Protection Plan, but it means something very different to me. And this is maybe more difficult than it sounds. I'm going to ask you to practice today what I call pregnant pauses. And here's what I mean. You know, as a speaker, when I'm teaching people how to tell a story, and I talk about the use of pregnant pauses when we're telling a story and we really want to draw people in, we'll say, "Well, you know, when I went to college," that's a pregnant pause. It's a little longer than we expect. And Clay's here today. He listens to me preach. I use these all the time in my preaching because, well, what do? When somebody pauses when we don't expect it, we get their attention. But the reason to practice, and what I'm asking you to do today is you're going to want to make assumptions and judgments. You're going to see something might make you angry. Somebody will tell a story. I'm going to tell a story in a minute. You may get angry over that story. But what I try to do is practice pregnant pause. I stop. I see something on TV. I'm an avid news watcher. It's not unusual for me to have watched 3 to 5 networks during the course of a day to pick up a variety of news, and I'll see a news story. I'll give you the example, the George Floyd story. You remember that? Most of us remember that story right now, right? And I saw the initial story, and you know, I get angry. Now, I might not get angry for the same reason you get angry. Maybe it was what I was hearing from the announcer. But what I did was I stopped and I began to look and try to see that from another perspective. And what do we call that? When we're challenged to look at something from a different perspective, it's practicing empathy. Now, empathy, you know, it's one of those words we use that is going to be essential to your getting as much out of today as possible. I want you to practice empathy. And we have a great precedent for this. In the Bible, it's called the art of practicing the golden rule. You all know it, right? Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Now, I have to tell you that every time I use this, I include what I call a bobbin paraphrase. In other words, I take a piece of scripture and I want to flush it out in the way I believe it was meant to be heard. And so my paraphrase is, do unto others as you would have them do unto you if you were in their place. I really believe that when Jesus said that, I think that's what he meant. So let me tell you what I mean by that. Because all religions, no matter if you're not a Christian and you're listening to this at some point and you're saying, well, wait, I don't believe in what Jesus says. Almost every religion I know of has some version of the golden rule. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. And my addition is as if you were in their place. So you're driving through where the county courthouse is. Doesn't matter whether you're in Clarion, Venango, Crawford, Mercer, Erie, doesn't matter where you are. You're driving down past the courthouse and a sheriff's car is sitting there and they open the back door and they take a scantily clad young lady in handcuffs out of the back of the door and they head into the courthouse. All she's wearing is this tiny little micro mini skirt, a tiny little top with no bra, and sandals on her feet, and her hands are cuffed behind her back. Now I want you to think about how you would react to that. What would you immediately begin to think about that person? And then what would you do? Would you turn and walk away? Would you walk to the other side of the room? Would you think, oh, look at that? Pick your favorite word, right? What are you doing? You're judging her. You're making an assumption about her. And it might be dependent on the place in which you live. I can tell you what you would think who she probably was if that was in Pittsburgh or Erie, New York City. Well, what if it happens in Venango or Clarion, Crawford County? We will make assumptions and judgments. Now, let me tell you that this, practicing empathy, is simply seeing the world we're talking about as they see it. So when we're talking about somebody that's been trafficked, I want you to try to see it from their position. And we're going to talk a lot about what that means today. And then I want you to, when we're talking about somebody that traffics people, whether it's labor trafficking or sex trafficking, I want you to think about why they do what they do. We're going to spend some time talking about who buys labor, who buys sex. Yeah, oh, by the way, if you didn't figure it out, you're probably going to be uncomfortable with some of the things that I'm going to talk about today. You probably haven't heard them in a sanctuary very often. But maybe that's why we're where we are. And so I'm gonna tell you that practicing empathy today is going to take work. When I'm telling the story of somebody abusing their child or beating somebody into submission, it may be easy to be empathetic with that person that's being abused or beaten. It's a lot harder to put yourself and look at it. But if you want to understand another, you have to be willing to look through their eyes. I became familiar with an author. I had read something else by her, and yeah, I'm going to refer to tons of books today. But one of the books that I'm in the middle of reading right now is called Dare to Lead by Brene Brown, and I picked this book up because it was mentioned in some of the other books I was reading, and I realized I'd read one of her earlier books. But she has produced a cute little video on empathy, and we're going to share that with you now.
So what is empathy, and why is it very different than sympathy? Empathy fuels connection. Sympathy drives disconnection. Empathy, it's very interesting. Teresa Wiseman is a nursing scholar who studied professions, very diverse professions where empathy is relevant, and came up with 4 qualities of empathy. Perspective taking, the ability to take the perspective of another person or recognize their perspective as their truth. Staying out of judgment, not easy when you enjoy it as much as most of us do. Recognizing emotion in other people and then communicating that. Empathy is feeling with people. And to me, I always think of empathy as this kind of sacred space when someone's kind of in a deep hole and they shout out from the bottom and they say, I'm stuck, it's dark, I'm overwhelmed. And then we look and we say, hey, you can climb down. I know what it's like down here, and you're not alone. Sympathy is, ooh, it's bad, no, you want a sandwich? Empathy is a choice, and it's a vulnerable choice, because in order to connect with you, I have to connect with something in myself that knows that feeling. Rarely, if ever, does an empathic response begin with at least. I had it, yeah. And we do it all the time, because you know what? Someone just shared something with us that's incredibly painful, and we're trying to silver lining it. I don't think that's a verb, but I'm using it as one. We're trying to put the silver lining around it. So I had a miscarriage. Oh, at least you know you can get pregnant. I think my marriage is falling apart. At least you have a marriage. John's getting kicked out of school. At least Sarah is an A student. But one of the things we do sometimes in the face of very difficult conversations is we try to make things better. If I share something with you that's very difficult, I'd rather you say, I don't even know what to say right now. I'm just so glad you told me. Because the truth is, rarely can a response make something better. What makes something better is connection.
Rarely can something make something better without connection. So what I'm asking you to do is to connect today. I'm asking you to connect with people that most likely are not like you. I'm asking you to be empathetic. If you're going to do that, you're going to need to become vulnerable. We're going to talk a lot today about being vulnerable, susceptible to physical or emotional attack or harm. Now, I'm not going to attack you. I'm not going to have a one-on-one and say, you should. But sometimes when somebody pushes us outside of our comfort zone, it really hurts. Because when we put ourselves in the prayer. I love that short video. I was working on something as I was preparing today's presentation, and I'm reading her book, and I just happened to be reading the pages on vulnerability, which is that vulnerability and empathy is her expertise. And she mentioned this little video, and I thought, oh, cool, I'm going to go watch it. And wow, that's powerful. I love the end. You know, one of the things I'm going to suggest to you today when we leave here is maybe we need to begin to think outside the box about things we've decided we should do. As I watched that video and I saw the bear put his arms around the fox, I said, I remember when I could do that freely. I remember when my nieces and nephews could crawl up on my lap as little kids and I could hug them and they felt loved, not wondering what I was up to. I became passionate about following Jesus because I was a part of a couple of young adult Bible studies that we weren't afraid to hug each other and tell each other we love them. I remember one night we rented a YMCA for the night, just us, and there's about 100 of us, and we were there all evening. And as we're getting ready to leave that night, we're all in the lobby and we're hugging each other and kind of kissing each other, you know, the way we used to do it. And the girl working behind the desk, she looked at me and she goes, "You're the huggingest, kissingest bunch I ever saw. Wow, you must really love one another." You know what? To hug and to receive a hug is to be vulnerable. Now, I know that cannot always be a good thing. But we might have to start thinking outside the box on some of the things we did.